It started like any other ordinary morning. The sun was soft and golden, rising steadily over the skyline of the city, casting long shadows on polished pavement and storefront glass. The kind of morning where the world feels calm, full of promise, and where no one expects anything extraordinary to happen. But for Robert and Martha Jenkins, that morning would mark the beginning of something they would never forget. Not because of what they hoped to find, but because of what they were made to feel. They walked together, slowly, arm in arm, two elderly souls wrapped in quiet grace. Robert wore his old brown hat, tilted slightly, and a clean but clearly worn button-down shirt. His khakis had seen better days, and his leather shoes were cracked along the edges. Martha, delicate yet dignified, wore a faded floral dress, modest and neat. Her graying hair was pulled into a soft bun. Her eyes, deep pools of kindness, held the kind of gentle hope only someone who had lived through decades of struggle could still carry with pride. As they reached the towering glass doors of Kingston Lux Motors, the city's most prestigious luxury car dealership, Robert opened the door for his wife with quiet respect, just as he had done every day since they married 52 years ago. The doors opened with a soft swoosh, like the beginning of a dream. Or so it seemed. Inside, the dealership sparkled like a palace. White marble floors reflected the sunlight like mirrors, stretching out beneath shimmering chandeliers that looked more like museum pieces than lighting. Sleek million-dollar vehicles sat on display like royalty, curves gleaming, leather interiors glowing under soft spotlights. Everything about the space whispered wealth, sophistication, exclusivity. And then, something changed. The moment Robert and Martha crossed the threshold, the noise dipped just slightly, imperceptibly to some, but deeply felt by the ones it was aimed at. The clinking glasses, the salesman laughter, the soft classical music playing overhead, it all seemed to retreat. A hush fell across the space. Not loud, just noticeable. Enough to make Martha's grip on Robert's arm tighten, just a little. They took slow, curious steps toward a Rolls-Royce boat tail, jet black like liquid obsidian, positioned in the center of the showroom like a throne. Martha gasped softly. "Robert, it's even more beautiful in person." Her voice trembled not with fear, but awe. Before they could get closer, a voice sliced through the moment. "Can I help you with something?" It was Bradley Scott, one of the top sales associates. Young, white, sharp-featured. His black suit looked more expensive than a semester of college. His smile was thin, his posture relaxed, his tone suspicious. Robert turned to him, always polite. "Yes, sir. We were hoping to learn more about this model. We've seen it in magazines for years. My wife's always dreamed of seeing one up close." Bradley didn't respond right away. His eyes didn't go to the car. They went to Robert's shoes, to Martha's purse, to the slight fraying in her sleeve, then to their hands, clasped tightly, then, finally, to their faces. And after a pause, he tilted his head. "These cars," he began, his voice syrupy smooth, "start at $900,000. They're not really, well, for everyone." He didn't say the words directly. He didn't have to. His tone did the heavy lifting. His eyes finished the sentence his lips refused to speak aloud. Martha looked down. Robert's back stiffened. But Bradley wasn't done. "There's a used sedan lot a few blocks down," he added casually. "Might be a better fit." Behind him, a female employee coughed to hide her chuckle. A man in designer loafers smirked and nudged his friend. A young woman in oversized sunglasses lowered them to get a better look, and then scoffed openly. Robert took a slow breath. He nodded, not in agreement, but in restraint. "We were just here to look. We didn't mean to bother anyone." Bradley's smile sharpened. "Of course. It's just that, well, our clients usually don't browse." He didn't need to say anything more. The weight of the moment had already pressed itself down on Robert's chest, and even deeper into Martha's heart. Her voice was a whisper. "Robert, maybe we should go." He turned to her, eyes soft but hollowing with pain. "We haven't done anything wrong." "I know," she said, already backing away, but it doesn't feel right here. Bradley stepped aside, gesturing toward the door with a flick of the wrist so casual it almost seemed choreographed. The couple turned, slowly walking back toward the entrance. The long hallway now felt like a tunnel, a walk of shame they didn't deserve. As the glass door swung closed behind them with a final hush, the sunlight outside suddenly felt harsher, colder. The world beyond the dealership kept moving. Traffic buzzed, people passed by, the day went on. But for Robert and Martha, something had stopped. Or maybe something had snapped. They stood there quietly for a moment on the steps. Martha stared straight ahead, her lips trembling. Robert looked down at his old shoes. Then quietly he whispered, "I'm sorry, dear. I thought maybe I don't know. I thought we'd be treated like people." Martha gently shook her head, blinking fast. "It's not your fault. I didn't think people still saw us this way." Behind the glass, Bradley turned and grinned at his colleague. Another successful defense of his showroom's image. Another pair of lookers sent packing. Nothing more than a day's work. What he didn't know, what no one inside that dealership knew, was that tomorrow morning, when those same glass doors opened again, everything they thought they knew would be shattered. Because no one, not Bradley, not the laughing staff, not even Martha and Robert, could have predicted who would be walking in behind them. The sun hadn't moved much since Robert and Martha Jenkins walked out of Kingston Lux Motors, but to them, it felt like the light had changed, like the warmth had dimmed, and the world had somehow grown colder. The dealership's sleek glass doors closed behind them with a hushed finality, cutting them off, not just from a building, but from something far deeper. A place they thought they might belong, even for a few minutes. They didn't say a word at first, just stood there, still holding each other's hands. But the silence was different now. It wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. Martha's eyes were fixed on nothing in particular. Her gaze was glassy, distant, as though the world had faded around her and only the echo of that cruel phrase, "people like you," remained. A sleek black sedan drove by. A couple in suits laughed in a nearby cafe. Life went on, and yet for Robert and Martha time had splintered. Martha finally whispered, her voice quivering, "I didn't expect it to feel like this." Robert looked down, not at her, but at the sidewalk, at his shoes, at the scuffed tips, worn from years of walking and working. His voice was low, quiet, filled with something unspoken. "I thought we were past this." Martha slowly turned toward him. Her hand trembled slightly as she placed it on his arm. "Don't blame yourself." "I brought you here," he murmured, pain rising just under the surface. "I thought maybe this once we'd be treated like we mattered." Her lips parted as if to respond, but the words caught in her throat. She couldn't reassure him because deep down she was thinking the same thing. They had spent their entire lives building a family, raising children, paying taxes, voting, working, giving, always giving. And still, they were seen as less, as unworthy. Behind them, just beyond the glare of the showroom lights, Isabella Cruz stood frozen. She had witnessed the whole thing. She hadn't meant to. It had just unfolded in front of her. From the way Bradley's tone changed the second he saw them, to the way the room seemed to pause, not in welcome, but in quiet rejection. She had seen Martha's shoulders tighten, Robert's hopeful expression harden into confusion, then quiet sadness. And now she couldn't move. Her hands clutched a leather folder of paperwork she was supposed to deliver to another customer, but it had become irrelevant. Her breath was shallow. Her heart beat louder than the faint music still playing inside the dealership. The image of the couple's retreating backs wouldn't leave her. As the door shut behind them, she took a step forward, then another. She didn't know exactly what she would say, only that she had to say something. Outside, Robert and Martha had just begun to descend the stone steps when they heard a voice behind them. "Excuse me." It was soft, but clear. Urgent, but respectful. "Please, wait." They turned. Standing at the doorway was Isabella. Not in heels like the other saleswomen, not dressed to impress, just a crisp white blouse and black slacks, her hair pulled into a loose ponytail. But there was something else, something in her eyes that neither Robert nor Martha had seen all day. Kindness and shame. Isabella approached carefully, her hands raised slightly as if to say, "I'm not here to hurt you." Her voice shook as she spoke. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. What happened in there? It's not who we are. Not all of us." Robert looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I saw what happened," Isabella continued, glancing behind her as if afraid someone might hear. "And I didn't step in. I should have. I should have said something sooner." Martha blinked, unsure of what to say. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came. "I know it doesn't fix anything," Isabella went on, her voice cracking with sincerity. "But, if you'll allow me, I'd be honored to show you the car you were interested in. Properly. Respectfully." The silence that followed was thick. Not hostile, but hesitant. The kind of silence where two people, after being hurt so many times, don't know whether to trust the outstretched hand in front of them. Robert turned to Martha. She looked up at him, eyes weary but soft. In that glance, they seemed to ask each other a single unspoken question. "Do we still believe in people?" And then, slowly, Martha nodded. "All right," Robert said gently. "Just for a moment." Isabella exhaled, visibly relieved. "Thank you, truly." As they walked back inside, Isabella beside them, something subtle changed in the air. Not the people, many of whom still stared, puzzled or disapproving. Not Bradley, who caught sight of them and sneered slightly, arms crossed, but something else, a shift, a crack in the foundation. Back inside the showroom, as Isabella led them past rows of polished cars, she ignored the whispers. She no longer cared what her colleagues thought. She had watched cruelty happen and chosen to act. Maybe late, but better than never. She brought them to the same black Rolls-Royce they had admired earlier. "This one," she said softly. "The wood is real walnut. The leather comes from a single, unblemished hide. But what really makes it special isn't the engine." She looked at them. "It's how it makes people feel." Martha ran her fingers along the chrome trim. Her reflection stared back at her, soft, aged, but powerful. For the first time that day, she smiled. Faint. Real. Robert opened the door and gently helped his wife inside, then sat next to her. The leather hugged them like it had been made just for them. The soundproof cabin was like a world of its own. For a moment, it was as if the outside didn't exist. "How's it feel?" Isabella asked. Robert looked at his wife, then at Isabella. "It feels like we matter." Isabella smiled, blinking back tears. "Because you do." In the distance, Bradley turned away in disgust, but no one paid him attention anymore. Something had begun to change. Not loud, not dramatic, but something real. Outside, the city went on. But inside that car, on that seat in that small moment, Robert and Martha Jenkins had finally found a piece of the respect that had been denied to them for far too long. The door to the Rolls-Royce closed with a soft, satisfying click. Inside the luxury cabin, Robert and Martha Jenkins sat quietly, their hands resting gently atop one another, the faint scent of fine leather surrounding them like a sanctuary. Outside, the dealership resumed its usual rhythm. Or at least, it tried to. But for Isabella Cruz, everything had changed. She stood beside the car, not just as a sales associate, but as something far more dangerous in that environment. A woman who had chosen to do the right thing. The moment she invited Robert and Martha back inside, the eyes began. First, a few glances from across the showroom. Then whispers. Then stares, the kind that didn't need words. She could feel the heat of their judgment without even turning around. From behind a sleek white McLaren, Julia, one of the top female sit-reps, shot Isabella a look that was part surprise, part scorn. Her glossy nails tapped impatiently on the carbon fiber hood, and she mouthed, "What are you doing?" Isabella ignored her. She didn't do this to be seen. She did it because silence, the kind she had practiced for too long, no longer sat right with her conscience. Back inside the car, Robert gently traced the edge of the walnut dashboard. The way his fingers moved, slowly, reverently, reminded Isabella of her own grandfather. A mechanic who could fix anything but never got the respect his skill deserved, who was called boy by men half his age just because of the color of his skin. This wasn't just about a car, and it wasn't just about two customers. It was about something much older, much deeper, much more broken. Isabella. The voice behind her snapped like a whip. She turned slowly. It was Bradley. His expression was tight, but his voice was composed. Too composed. He looked like a man trying hard not to unravel in public. "Can I speak with you for a second?" he asked, gesturing toward the office area. Isabella didn't move. "I'm with customers," she said simply, her tone neutral but firm. Bradley's eyes narrowed. He stepped closer. "With those customers?" His words dripped with disdain. Isabella didn't flinch. "Yes, with them." A few feet away, the manager, Mr. Harris, a tall man in his late 50s with a perpetually unreadable expression, stepped out of his glass office. His eyes scanned the room, quickly absorbing the tension. He didn't speak, just watched. Bradley leaned in slightly, voice low but vicious. "You're making a scene. You're embarrassing the team. They're not buyers." "They're human beings," Isabella replied, her voice rising just slightly. Not angry, just undeniable. A hush began to fall across the showroom once more, slowly, organically. The way tension spreads in a room where something real is happening. Where truth is trying to claw its way into the light. From the glass-paneled mezzanine above, two executives paused mid-conversation and looked down. A janitor in the far corner stopped sweeping. Julia put down her phone. All eyes were now between Bradley and Isabella. Robert and Martha noticed too. Robert slowly opened the car door. He didn't want to interrupt, but he also didn't want the young woman who had shown them respect to be left alone under fire. Isabella turned to them briefly and gave a small, reassuring nod. Then looked back at Bradley. "You laughed at them," she said. "You humiliated them." Bradley scoffed, but his smirk wavered. "It's not personal, it's business." "No," Isabella said clearly. "It's racism, dressed in a suit." The words hit like thunder. A few employees gasped softly. The room was no longer just tense, it was charged. Mr. Harris finally stepped forward. "That's enough," he said, his voice calm but carrying weight. Bradley turned toward him, clearly expecting support. "Sir, she's overstepping." Mr. Harris didn't respond immediately. His gaze moved between the two, then shifted to the elderly couple watching quietly from beside the Rolls-Royce. "I saw the footage earlier," Harris said slowly, "and I've seen this dealership through many seasons. What happened today is not who we say we are." He looked directly at Isabella. "Thank you for reminding us." Bradley's mouth fell slightly open. "Sir?" Mr. Harris raised a hand. "We'll talk later, Bradley." It was a short sentence, but it sounded like a sentence. Period. Bradley backed away, his confidence draining with each step. For the first time in years, he looked unsure of himself. Isabella turned back to Robert and Martha, her shoulders still tense, but her eyes had something new in them now. Clarity and purpose. Martha smiled at her, not a wide smile, just enough to say, "We see you." Robert extended his hand. Isabella hesitated a moment, then took it. His grasp was firm, but warm. "You didn't have to do all that," he said. "I did," Isabella replied, "because I know what it feels like to be invisible in a place that smiles in your face, but closes its doors behind your back." There was no applause, no grand reward, just silence, the kind that follows truth when it's finally spoken aloud. But somewhere in that silence, something shifted. People had heard. People had seen. And once that happens, you can't pretend it didn't. As Robert and Martha exited the car, Isabella walked them toward the exit once again. But this time, not in shame, not in retreat. They left the dealership not as outcasts, but as honored guests, accompanied by the only person inside who had remembered what human decency looked like. They stepped outside into the early afternoon sun, and even though the sky hadn't changed, everything else had. Inside, Isabella returned to her desk. Her hands trembled, but not from fear, from the weight of having stood up when it mattered. She didn't know that tomorrow, her name would be spoken across the entire showroom for a very different reason. But for now, she had done enough. Sometimes the first voice of courage isn't the loudest, it's simply the first to refuse to stay silent. The Jenkins residence sat quietly on the edge of the city, a modern villa surrounded by trimmed hedges and warm amber lighting. From the outside it was peaceful, almost serene. But inside, behind the elegant curtains and artfully arranged dinnerware, there was a silence too heavy for any home. The dining table, usually filled with conversation and soft laughter, was still tonight. Robert and Martha sat side by side, their meals untouched, their utensils occasionally clinking against porcelain plates more out of habit than appetite. Across from them sat their son, Damien Jenkins, a man the city knew well. Tech visionary, founder of one of the fastest-growing EV startups in the country. Youngest African-American CEO to grace the cover of Forbes twice, and more importantly, the pride of his parents. Tonight, though, Damien wasn't speaking. He was watching. He noticed the way Martha gently stirred her soup, but didn't raise her spoon. The way Robert pushed his roasted vegetables around the plate as though he were sketching a map rather than preparing to eat. Their eyes rarely met, and their voices, when they did speak, were thin and distant. It was wrong. They were never this quiet. He set down his fork. "Mom, Dad, what's going on?" Martha blinked and looked up, startled. Robert cleared his throat, forcing a smile. "Nothing, son. We're just a bit tired today." Damien's brows furrowed. He leaned in slightly. "Tired? You both haven't said more than 10 words since I got home. This isn't you." Martha opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Instead, she looked down, her thumb nervously rubbing the edge of her napkin. Beside her, Robert sighed, and this time there was no smile to cover it. "It's all right, Martha," he murmured, his voice worn but steady. "He deserves to know." Damien straightened in his chair, his full attention now anchored. "We went to a car dealership today," Robert said, eyes fixed on the table. "That one you told us about. The luxury one downtown. The one with the Rolls-Royces?" Damien asked. Robert nodded. Martha's voice was barely above a whisper. "I always wanted to see one up close. Just once." Damien softened. "And did you?" Robert exhaled slowly. "We walked in, looked around, tried to ask a question." Martha's voice cracked. "They laughed at us." That sentence, just 4 words, hit the air like a slap. Damien leaned back, stunned. "Wait. They told us," Robert added, his voice low and deliberate, "that people like us didn't belong there." There was no drama in his tone, no bitterness, just raw, distilled truth. "They said we couldn't afford it," Martha said, looking away. "Not because they saw our bank account, but because they saw our skin." Damien was silent for a long time, not because he didn't believe them, but because he did. He had seen the same poison dressed in 1,000 polite disguises, on stages, in boardrooms, in boardwalk cafes. But hearing it from the 2 people who had raised him to believe in respect, dignity, and perseverance was something else entirely. He clenched his jaw. "Did they say it directly?" Robert hesitated. "Not in so many words, but the look, the tone, the way everyone around joined in the laughter." He shook his head. "We've dealt with subtle racism our whole lives, Damien," Martha added. "But this was blunt, shameless." For a few seconds the room was still. Damien reached for his glass of water, took a slow sip, then set it down with purpose. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. But beneath it, a storm was brewing. "You did nothing wrong," he said. "Not a damn thing." His parents looked at him, not surprised by his support, but still unsure of what came next. "The people who treated you like that," Damien continued, "they're the ones who should be ashamed." He stood up slowly, walked toward the window, and stared out to the night. The city skyline twinkled in the distance. It usually inspired him. Tonight, it looked cold. Martha, still seated, asked gently, "Damien, what are you thinking?" Damien turned around. His eyes were sharp now, not with anger, but with focus. "I'm thinking," he said, "that there's something poetic about returning to a place that tried to make you feel small, and reminding them exactly who they disrespected." Robert raised a brow. "You mean, go back?" "I mean," Damien said, stepping forward, "we're not going to let this slide, not because of ego, but because of principle." Martha frowned slightly, worried. "I don't want this to turn into a scene, Damien." Damien softened. "Mom, this isn't about making a scene. It's about making a statement." He looked at both of them, not just as a son but as a man who had inherited their quiet strength and turned it into silent power. "You gave me everything," he said. "Love, wisdom, courage. The least I can do is give you back your dignity, in front of the very people who tried to take it." He walked over to the small marble-top console table near the entrance, picked up his phone, and began typing. Robert watched him curiously. "Who are you calling?" Damien didn't look up. "My team." "For what?" He turned, eyes clear, voice steady. "Tomorrow morning, 2 Rolls-Royce boat tails will be parked right in front of that dealership, and you and I, Dad, and you, Mom, will walk through that front door wearing the same clothes they judged you in yesterday." Martha gasped. Robert blinked. "Wait, Damien, that's—" "No, this isn't revenge. This is a reminder," Damien said, his voice firm. "That true wealth isn't in appearance. It's in how you carry yourself when others try to bring you down." He hit send, then placed the phone down like a final signature on a contract. "I want them to know," he said quietly, "that the couple they laughed at yesterday raised the man who owns the future of transportation in this country." And in that moment, Robert and Martha, still shocked, still humbled, exchanged a glance. Pride, gratitude, and, for the first time all day, the smallest flicker of joy. Because when a child rises and turns back to lift his parents, that is legacy, and that is power they'll never see coming. Night had settled over the Jenkins residence like a velvet curtain, draping the home in a hush that seemed deeper than usual. The warm golden light from sconces and table lamps created gentle shadows across the walnut floors and high ceilings. In the distance, the city glowed, tall towers blinking with silent life. But within these walls, the air was still. Robert and Martha had gone to bed. Their door was closed, their room dim, but elsewhere in the house, a single light still burned. Damien Jenkins sat alone in his private study, surrounded by walls lined with books, framed awards, and articles bearing his name. Normally, this room gave him a sense of clarity and control, a sanctuary where he turned visions into reality, where every plan, every strategy began. But tonight, it was not clarity he sought, it was justice. The desk before him was immaculate, but his thoughts were not. His fingers rested on the smooth surface still. His breathing was calm, but his jaw had tensed, holding back something far more volatile than anger, resolve. The faces of his parents from dinner lingered in his mind. Not the parents he had known all his life, full of joy, wit, and pride, but 2 people who had been quietly wounded. People who had done nothing wrong, yet returned home carrying invisible bruises inflicted by cruelty, wrapped in suits and sales scripts. He had seen the pain in their eyes. They hadn't even wanted to speak of it. That made it worse. Damien opened his laptop and clicked into a secure messaging app used only for top-level directives. His assistant was online. As expected, she never truly logged off. He began typing, the keys soft beneath his fingers. He told her to arrange for 2 Rolls-Royce boat-tail vehicles to be delivered the following morning. Both black, both fully equipped, both flawless. He specified the time, 9 a.m., not a minute later. She responded almost immediately, asking if a message should be included for the dealership. Damien stared at the screen for a moment before replying that no message was necessary. The presence of the cars and the people stepping out of them would say everything. He added one more instruction, The car should be parked directly in front of the dealership, highly visible to all staff and customers. There would be no discretion. He wanted the arrival to speak through posture, not noise. The reply came back quickly. It was done. Damien closed the laptop slowly, then leaned back in his chair. His eyes drifted to the large windows that faced the distant skyline. Normally, he would admire the lights of the city, a kingdom he had helped shape with nothing more than grit and brilliance. But tonight, that view meant nothing to him. Because what was the point of building a world-class empire if the very people who raised you couldn't step into one building without being humiliated? He stood and walked to the window, pressing one hand against the cool glass. His reflection looked back at him, but it wasn't the man in the magazine covers or the one smiling beside foreign dignitaries. It was a son. The son of a man who wore old khakis with quiet pride, and a woman who kept her grace even while being laughed at. The truth burned inside him. His parents had been judged, not because they lacked money or intelligence or dignity, but because of the clothes on their back and the color of their skin. And in 2025, that was still enough for people to sneer. He would not allow it to end with silence. Damien turned from the window and walked over to the liquor cart in the corner. He poured himself a small measure of scotch, more out of ritual than need, and let the warmth settle into him as he returned to his desk. He opened a new document on his screen and began outlining something more enduring than retaliation. He began drafting a company-wide memo, one that would evolve into policy about respect, implicit bias, and customer dignity. If his parents had suffered today, how many others had faced the same indignities in smaller, quieter ways? This moment would not be a footnote. It would become culture, something lasting. But before he finished, one more thought surfaced. One more move. He picked up his phone and dialed a direct number to a friend who worked in corporate surveillance and security tech. The man answered with professional calm. Damien asked if he could gain access to the dealership's main floor cameras for the next morning. Just a few hours of internal feed. No public distribution, no news coverage, just eyes on the ground. The man didn't ask questions. He simply said it could be arranged. Damien gave him the time and hung up. He didn't need drama. He didn't want spectacle. He wanted truth to be seen. He finished his scotch in one sip, closed the draft memo, and shut the laptop. The silence in the room was total now, but it was not empty. It pulsed with purpose. Something had shifted. Tomorrow wasn't just about walking back into the dealership. It was about walking back in without changing a single thing. The same parents, the same clothes, the same soft steps. But this time, the weight of their presence would land differently. Because Martha Jenkins wasn't coming to ask questions. He was coming to remind them, and everyone watching, that the people you look down on today may be the ones who sign your paycheck tomorrow. Far across the city, in a luxury apartment filled with glass and marble, Bradley Scott leaned back on his couch with a half-full glass of red wine. He wore a silk robe and a self-satisfied smile. The events of the day were already fading from his mind. In his eyes, he had simply done his job, protected the brand, kept out the undesirables. He didn't remember their names. He never even thought to ask. But the world he believed he understood, the hierarchy he thought was unshakable, was about to change. And when it did, the crash would be silent, but devastating. Back in the quiet of the study, Damien turned off the light, leaving only the glow of the city behind the glass. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., they would walk in through the same door that tried to close on them. And when they did, the people inside would finally see. They had not dismissed a poor couple. They had dismissed a legacy. And legacies never stay quiet for long. The morning broke calm and clear, with a pale blue sky stretching softly above the city. A cool spring breeze stirred the trees lining the boulevard outside Kingston Lux Motors, gently brushing the polished glass exterior of the showroom like a quiet warning. Inside, the usual rhythm of luxury retail was already underway. Coffee brewing in the back office, staff straightening their ties, floors gleaming like mirrors beneath million-dollar machines. Bradley Scott, freshly shaven and immaculately dressed, leaned against the counter sipping an espresso. His smirk was present as always. A sale was expected later that day. Another high-profile client, he thought. Another commission. Another affirmation of status. He didn't know what was coming. No one did. At precisely 8:58 a.m., the sunlight caught a flash of polished black metal at the far end of the street. Then came the first one. A Rolls-Royce boat tail, the rarest of its kind, turned the corner with an elegance that silenced even traffic. Its custom black paint shimmered like obsidian, reflecting the morning light in waves. Behind it, a second one followed, identical, equally majestic, and just as impossible to ignore. They didn't speed, they didn't blast music or draw attention with fanfare. They simply arrived. And that alone stopped everything. Inside the dealership, employees and early customers turned toward the massive showroom windows, drawn by the sight outside. Conversations halted. Coffee cups were lowered. Even the soft classical music piping from hidden speakers seemed to fade into the background. Bradley furrowed his brow and stepped closer to the glass, watching as the vehicles pulled up and parked directly in front of the entrance. His smirk faltered slightly. He didn't recognize the drivers. Then, slowly, the doors of the first car opened. Out stepped Martha Jenkins. Tall, composed, radiating a quiet authority that made people instinctively straighten their posture. He wore a simple, tailored black suit, no flash, no arrogance, just presence. The staff at Kingston Lux recognized him immediately. One of the most powerful black entrepreneurs in the country. The man who had signed contracts with international auto giants, who had sat with presidents, who had built a clean energy empire before the age of 40. His name had been whispered in industry circles for years. No one understood what he was doing here. Until the doors of the second car opened. And there they were. Robert and Martha Jenkins, dressed in the exact same modest clothes they had worn just 2 days prior. The same floral dress, the same worn khakis, the same brown hat. Nothing had changed, except everything had. They didn't walk with bitterness or vengeance. They walked with grace. Heads held high, shoulders straight, their hands clasped as always, not in fear but in love. Inside the showroom, no one dared speak. Bradley took a step back, the same couple he had ridiculed, mocked, sent away with a smirk. And now they had returned, flanked by the symbols of everything this place pretended to represent. Elegance, wealth, exclusivity, but brought back with a kind of power no car could ever carry. Real legacy. Damien reached the front doors first and opened them for his parents. The glass doors swung wide with a soft whoosh, but the silence that followed was deafening. They stepped inside. Every eye turned. No one laughed, no one whispered. The man who had mocked them just 2 days before now stood frozen, his face drained of color. His espresso cup trembled slightly in his hand, then lowered to the counter, forgotten. Damien walked a few steps forward, then stopped in the middle of the showroom. He looked around slowly, deliberately, his eyes passing over every associate, every customer, and finally landing on Bradley Scott. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The silence alone spoke volumes. In the back of the room, Isabella Cruz stood near her desk, her heart pounding as she watched. She hadn't known they would return, let alone like this. Her eyes filled with emotion, her chest tight with pride. She had believed in their worth when no one else did, and now here they stood, shining proof that she had been right all along. Damien finally broke the silence. He spoke clearly, without theatrics. 2 days ago, my parents walked through these doors. They were treated like they didn't belong, not because they caused trouble, not because they were disrespectful, but because someone decided their appearance, their age, and the color of their skin made them unworthy. His voice didn't rise, but the weight behind it settled on every soul in the room. They were dismissed, mocked, sent away like strangers in their own city. Damien turned and looked at his parents. And yet they came back. A long pause. He faced the crowd again. Not to prove a point, but to remind you and everyone watching that respect is not earned by what you wear, or how you speak, or what your bank balance says. It's earned by how you carry yourself when no one believes in you. He let those words linger, then added, softer but stronger. And when you laugh at people who walk in quietly, you might be laughing at the very hairy hands that built the path you stand on. Bradley stepped forward, pale and shaky. Mr. Jenkins, I didn't realize. Damien held up a hand. I'm not here for your apology. His voice didn't tremble. I'm here for accountability. At that moment, Mr. Harris, the dealership manager, appeared from his office. He looked flustered, tense, but he walked forward and nodded slowly. We've reviewed the security footage from that day, Mr. Harris said, and we understand exactly what happened. The staff began murmuring. A few lowered their heads. Some looked ashamed. Others simply stared, stunned into silence. Damien nodded. Good, he said, because today this is no longer about a sale. This is about principle. He then turned to his parents and offered his arm. Shall we take a proper look around? Robert smiled faintly. Martha squeezed his hand. Together they walked past the stunned staff, past the cars, past the man who once stood in their way. And this time, every step they took left behind not humiliation, but quiet triumph. The silence that filled Kingston Lux Motors wasn't just stillness. It was the kind of silence that arrives only when something irreversible is about to happen. Damien Jenkins stood calmly, his posture tall and assured, yet unthreatening. His parents moved beside him like royalty returning to a palace that had once cast them out. Their presence was not loud, not bitter. It was quiet, and that made it thunderous. Bradley Scott hovered near the reception desk, the smirk long gone from his lips. His palms were beginning to sweat, though he tried hard not to show it. The same man who had laughed so effortlessly 2 days ago now shifted uneasily, eyes flicking from Damien to the others in the room. Across the showroom, Mr. Harris, the dealership manager, approached with careful steps. He had aged somehow in the last few minutes. His tailored blazer looked a bit tighter, his collar stiffer. In his hand was a sleek tablet, and on its screen was the truth, frozen in time, waiting to be played. Mr. Jenkins, Harris began, his voice low, respectful, yet taut with tension. We've reviewed the security footage from the day in question. Damien gave a small nod. Play it, he said. Harris hesitated, just for a second, then tapped the screen. The dealership's central monitors flickered to life. One by one, staff and customers turned toward them. Even those who had tried to remain indifferent now found themselves drawn in. You could feel the air thicken. No one looked away. There, in crisp high definition, was the scene from 2 days earlier. Robert and Martha Jenkins entered, dressed simply, stepping inside with the kind of cautious curiosity people have when they respect a place more than it respects them. The room watched in complete silence as Bradley walked up to them on the footage, arms folded, expression already dripping with contempt. Then the sound played. They heard it all. Bradley's sarcastic tone, the venom masked in politeness, the words he had said with such confidence. These cars start at $900,000. People like you can't afford them. The camera caught it. The pause, the glance at their skin, the deliberate exclusion laced into his voice. Then came the laughter, from a few employees, from 2 nearby customers, from a woman behind the counter who had since moved quietly to the back. Every second of it, captured and now rebroadcast before the very people who once played witness, but did nothing. When the footage ended, the screen went black, and no one moved. Bradley shifted in place. He opened his mouth as if to say something, anything, but nothing came out. His lips parted, then closed. Damien looked at Mr. Harris. Well? The manager cleared his throat. He spoke not just to Damien, but to everyone watching. What we saw on that footage, he began, was unacceptable. It was offensive, discriminatory, and beneath everything we claim to stand for. He turned to face Bradley fully now. I am truly disappointed in your behavior, Bradley. It does not reflect our values, and it certainly doesn't reflect how we treat people. Effective immediately. He didn't need to finish. The entire room understood. Bradley's mouth dropped open in slow motion, as if he were still trying to comprehend what was happening. You're firing me? He said, the words landing flat in the dead air. Mr. Harris didn't blink. I have no choice. Your conduct was not only inappropriate, it was damaging. To our customers, to our staff, and now to our reputation. Bradley looked around the room, as if searching for support. But there was none. The same people who once laughed at his jokes now avoided his eyes. A few shook their heads quietly. One or two looked at the ground, ashamed. Isabella Cruz stood near the far wall, her face steady but her heart pounding. She had dreamed of this moment, not out of vengeance but out of justice. Her voice had been the only one that tried to push against this tide. And now the tide was turning. Damien stepped forward. He looked Bradley straight in the eye, not with anger but with clarity. This wasn't a mistake, he said. It was a choice. You looked at my parents and made a decision about who they were based on what they wore and the color of their skin. He paused, his voice tightening just slightly. You didn't just judge them. You disrespected the years they worked, the family they built, the sacrifices they made so their son could stand where I stand now. Bradley swallowed hard. His face was pale, drained of every ounce of arrogance. I hope, Damien continued, this teaches you and everyone here a simple lesson. Dignity is not earned through money or clothes. It is a birthright. Mr. Harris stepped forward again, looking directly at Bradley. You may leave now. Bradley didn't speak. He didn't protest. He simply turned, his steps heavy, his face hollow. As he walked toward the exit, each footfall echoed across the marble floors like a warning. Not just to him, but to everyone who had ever laughed with him, nodded in agreement, or said nothing when silence was a betrayal. The door closed behind him with a mechanical click. And that was it. The reckoning had arrived, not with rage, not with fists, but with truth, and the courage to hold it up in daylight. Damien looked at his parents, then placed a gentle hand on his father's shoulder. I'm sorry you had to go through this, he said softly. But today, we showed them something they'll never forget. Robert didn't say much. He didn't need to. His eyes, full of emotion tinged with tears, said everything. Martha simply nodded, her hand finding Damien's. Her fingers curled around his like a child reaching for safety. But this time, it wasn't safety she found. It was victory. And for the first time in 2 days she smiled, not because justice had been done, but because dignity had walked back through the door and never bowed its head. The echo of Bradley's departure still lingered in the marble-floored showroom like smoke after a fire. People stood motionless, some in reflection, others in quiet shame. But amid the heavy stillness, something lighter began to emerge, the unmistakable feeling that something right had finally happened. Martha Jenkins turned from the door where the man who once laughed at his parents had just walked out in disgrace. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. His mission had never been revenge. It had always been about something far greater. Now it was time to complete that mission. Not with punishment, but with recognition. Damien looked around the room slowly, letting the silence settle once more before his voice rose again, this time warmer, quieter, but filled with meaning. There's one more thing I need to say, he began. The room turned to him, expectant. He took a breath, then let his eyes fall on Isabella Cruz, who stood near the far side of the showroom, almost hidden behind a pillar, uncertain whether she was supposed to fade into the background or step forward. She looked startled when she realized he was speaking to her. "Isabella Cruz," he said clearly. "Could you come here for a moment?" All heads turned to her. The young woman froze for a second. Her throat tightened. She had not expected to be called, not in front of everyone, and certainly not by Damien Jenkins. Still, she stepped forward, slowly, humbly. Her posture was cautious, but her eyes held that same quiet strength that had made her the only one in the building who had dared to act when it mattered most. "Yes, sir," she said softly once she reached him. Damien smiled gently. He extended his hand, and when she took it, he held it with both of his. "On behalf of my parents," he said, "I want to thank you." Her eyes widened, her lips parting slightly. She looked to Robert and Martha, who were now smiling, not out of politeness but with deep, sincere gratitude. "You are the only one in this dealership," Damien continued, "who treated my parents like human beings, with respect, with patience, with kindness." A few nearby staff lowered their heads. "You didn't just sell a car," Damien added. "You stood up for dignity when it wasn't safe, when it wasn't easy. And you did it not for attention or approval, but because it was right." Isabella's eyes brimmed with tears. She struggled to find words. "I just did what anyone should have done," she whispered. "But they didn't," Damien replied. He turned to the dealership manager, Mr. Harris, who had been watching with quiet respect. His voice now rang a little louder, enough for everyone in the room to hear. "I've decided to purchase the Rolls-Royce my parents were interested in. The one they were mocked for approaching." Gasps rippled through the room. That car, one of the most expensive in the dealership, had sat untouched for months, and now it was sold, just like that. "But I have one condition," Damien said. "Every cent of the commission from that sale must go directly to Isabella Cruz." There was a pause, and then a stunned silence broke into murmurs. Isabella's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes widened with disbelief. I can't," she said, almost choking on her words. "Sir, that's far too much. I didn't do this for—" Damien shook his head gently. "Yes, you can, and you will. Because in a world where silence is safe and speaking up is costly, people like you must be rewarded. Not just with words but with actions." Mr. Harris stepped forward now, his face no longer tight, but open, humbled. "I agree," he said. "And I would also like to announce something else." The room turned toward him. Effective immediately, Isabella Cruz will be promoted to Senior Sales Manager of Kingston Lux Motors. For a moment, the room was silent. Then came the applause. Genuine. Loud. Echoing off the marble and glass. Customers clapped, some employees joined. A few even wiped their eyes. Isabella stood frozen, her hands shaking slightly, her heart pounding in disbelief. Damien reached out again, this time, not as a CEO, but as a grateful son. He shook her hand once more, then placed his other hand over hers. "Thank you, Isabella," he said softly. "You reminded all of us that kindness, real kindness, still exists, and that one voice can change everything." From behind him, Martha and Robert stepped forward. Martha took Isabella's hand in both of hers. "My dear," she said, her voice gentle but filled with emotion, "you were our only light that day. When we felt invisible, you made us feel seen." Robert nodded, his voice deep and steady. "You didn't just show us a car," he said. "You showed us our worth. And I will never forget that." Isabella's tears finally spilled over. She didn't cry out of weakness. She cried because someone had seen her. Because for the first time in her life, the hardest decision she ever made, to speak when it was easier to stay silent, had led to something beautiful. And for the first time since this story began, the mood in the dealership had changed completely. No longer tense, no longer cold, but full of warmth. A transformation had taken place. Because when someone is brave enough to stand for what's right, the world around them begins to rise with them. The applause gradually faded. But the silence that followed was not the same cold hush that had greeted Robert and Martha Jenkins 2 days ago. This was something different. This was reverence. As the room settled, Damien gently stepped back and let his parents take center stage, not by intention, but by sheer presence. Robert stood tall, hands calmly at his sides, his worn brown hat still perfectly centered on his head. Martha remained close to him, her small floral dress swaying gently with each breath she took. The years on their faces had never looked more beautiful than they did now. Not because they had been weathered, but because they had endured. They didn't smile for the room. They didn't wave or gloat or boast. They simply stood, and by doing so, they rose higher than anyone there. Damien turned to them, his expression soft now, no longer the face of the powerful CEO, but of the son they had raised. A man shaped by their sacrifices, their silence, their grace. He extended his arm. "Shall we go?" he asked gently. Martha nodded. Robert gave a quiet hum of agreement. Together, the three turned and began walking toward the glass doors. Their steps were slow, not from weakness, but from intention. Each step echoed faintly on the marble floor, the sound crisp and steady. With every movement, people shifted aside, not out of obligation, but out of quiet respect. They weren't escorted. They didn't need to be. The dealership, the same place that had once tried to shrink them, now seemed to widen around them, making space for something greater than wealth or power. Dignity. From behind the counter, one of the junior sales associates, a young man who had laughed under his breath just 2 days earlier, stood motionless, regret in his eyes. He hadn't spoken. He hadn't mocked. But he had said nothing, and now he wished he had. He lowered his gaze. Near the back, the older woman with the blonde bun and clipboard who had once smirked during Bradley's taunts found herself blinking away tears. She didn't know why exactly. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the way Martha held her chin up. Maybe it was the grace of quiet people walking away without anger. Isabella Cruz stood near the front, just beside the grand revolving display. She didn't follow them. She just watched, her hand resting gently over her heart. A single tear slipped down her cheek, not one of sadness but one of honor, because she had been a witness and a participant, and now part of something bigger than herself. As the Jenkins family reached the door, Damien paused briefly and looked back at the showroom. No words, no speech, just a moment, a glance that seemed to say everything. "Remember this." Then, with a final step, the glass doors parted, and the family walked into the soft morning sun. Outside, the 2 Rolls-Royce boat tails still gleamed like statues of poetic justice. Their polished surfaces reflected the city skyline and the quiet power of 3 people who had just rewritten the rules of how one answers hate, not with vengeance, but with values. Robert turned toward Damien and spoke softly, almost like a confession. "I never imagined this moment." Damien looked at him, his voice low and full of reverence. "You earned it long before today." Martha took Damien's arm again, just like she had done that first morning, but now her steps were lighter. Her grip wasn't hesitant anymore, it was steady. They reached the cars, and yet they didn't rush to leave. They stood for a moment, letting the wind carry away whatever pain still lingered, letting the warmth of the day settle on their shoulders, letting the quiet say what words could not. Inside the showroom, no one moved. The dealership stood still. Not paralyzed by fear or shame anymore, but by realization. They had seen something rare. They had seen humility conquer arrogance. They had seen a family return, not to humiliate, but to illuminate. They had seen that power doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it walks in wearing old clothes, holding hands, and asking simple questions. And when it leaves a silence you'll never forget. As Damien helped his parents into the car, Isabella stepped outside quietly. She didn't call out, she didn't intrude. She just stood near the door, watching as Robert looked up at her one last time and offered a gentle nod, the kind of gesture that meant more than any thank you ever could. Martha gave a small wave. Isabella smiled, her eyes still shining, and whispered to herself, "They'll remember this forever." Damien entered the driver's seat of the first Rolls-Royce. The engine started. Smooth, almost silent. The cars pulled away from the curb in perfect sync, not with speed or flair, but with purpose. A quiet procession of elegance and meaning, fading into the rhythm of the city. But what they left behind inside that dealership was not a memory. It was a standard, a new way of seeing people, a new way of doing business. A new understanding that dignity is not given by the world. It is carried by those who know who they are. The dealership never quite sounded the same after that day. The glass still shimmered, the marble floors still gleamed, the luxury cars still purred softly under showroom lights. But something beneath all the polish had changed. Something unseen, yet unshakable. It wasn't just a scandal that passed through Kingston Lux Motors. It was a reckoning. A moment that peeled back the surface and revealed something uncomfortable, and then offered something redemptive. Bradley Scott's desk sat empty now. His nameplate had been removed. The sleek black phone on his desk had been reassigned. But the real vacancy he left behind wasn't measured in objects. It was in the air. That corner of the showroom, once filled with subtle arrogance, now felt quieter, humbled. And the people who remained? They remembered. The young intern who had watched the entire incident unfold from the coffee machine that first day now moved differently. His laughter was no longer automatic. His eyes no longer rolled when an older customer walked in wearing worn shoes. Instead, he straightened up. He greeted them with care, and he meant it. The woman who once scoffed from behind her clipboard had requested to shadow Isabella Cruz, not out of guilt, but out of admiration. Because Isabella, the quiet woman who had once simply kept her head down, had become the face of a new kind of leadership, one grounded in humanity, not hierarchy. As senior sales manager, she didn't rule with power, she led with principle. Her first week in the new role, she implemented a new orientation module. Empathy first. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't corporate jargon. It was real. New hires were trained not just in features and pricing, but in listening, in looking beyond clothes, skin, and assumptions. In understanding that every customer walking through those doors carried a story that deserved respect. And quietly, the numbers rose. Sales improved, reviews doubled, referrals increased. But more importantly, so did self-awareness. The footage of the Jenkins family's return was never leaked online. There were no headlines, no press conferences. Damien had made that clear. This wasn't about spectacle, it was about change. But stories, especially the kind rooted in truth, have a way of finding air. And in hushed conversations, in church parking lots, in neighborhood cafes, the story began to move. People told it with reverence. Did you hear about the couple who got turned away from the luxury dealership? Their son came back the next day with 2 Rolls-Royces. No yelling. No revenge. Just walked in, looked the man in the eye, and said nothing. And they fired him, right there, in front of everyone. Turns out the son was a billionaire. But that wasn't the point. The point was, they never looked down on anyone again. The story wasn't about the money. It was about presence, integrity, restoration. In the weeks that followed, other dealerships in the area quietly revisited their training protocols. Some sent staff to observe Isabella's team. Others invited her to speak at leadership meetings. She didn't boast. She simply shared what she had always believed. It doesn't cost anything to be kind, but the price of indifference can ruin a legacy. And across town, in the Jenkins home, life returned to its quiet rhythm. Robert still wore his favorite hat when he ran errands. Martha still baked on Saturdays. Damien still called every evening, sometimes with business updates, sometimes just to hear their voices. They didn't talk much about the incident anymore. Because it no longer needed to be discussed. It had already done what it was meant to do. It had healed something, reclaimed something, redefined something. And the wound it left behind, though painful, had become a scar they wore with quiet pride. A scar that reminded them, and everyone who heard their story, that dignity does not beg to be seen. It simply walks in, and it stays standing. One afternoon, months later, Isabella received a letter in the mail. It wasn't from the dealership, it wasn't from a client. It was handwritten, elegant, on soft ivory paper. Inside was a single note. Dear Isabella, you didn't just change the way we were treated. You changed the way we saw ourselves that day, and for that, you will always be part of our family. With love and gratitude, Martha and Robert Jenkins. She read it twice, then placed it in a frame on her desk, not as a trophy, but as a truth. A reminder that even in the sleekest places, the softest voices still hold the most power. And so the story of that couple, the ones everyone laughed at, the ones someone tried to erase, became more than just a moment. It became a legacy. A reminder whispered between strangers, a shift in the way people looked at one another, and a quiet promise that echoed long after the cars had driven away. Never judge a person by their appearance. Never assume worth from what you see, because one day, when you least expect it, grace may walk back through your doors, and this time you'll recognize it.